Hello everyone. In this video we are going to demonstrate how we use HashiCorp Vault node in building a Kumologica flow. So in order to demonstrate this, we need to first ensure that HashiCorp Vault server is up and running. So we have our server up and running. The next thing we need to do is to install HashiCorp Vault node into the designer. So by default, the palette will not be having the Vault node. The Vault node is part of the security and we are not having it right now on the palette. So we are going to install this by clicking on add more nodes. As you can see here, the exchange is having a lot of nodes available and we are going to install HashiCorp Vault node. A restart is required and restart has been completed. Now if you see here on the security, you can see the Vault node is already available. So in this demo, we are actually going to create a flow which is making an external service call to a flight API. And in order to make this invocation, we need an API token. And similarly, in this flow, we will be also having Splunk integration, which is also require a Splunk token. Now, both these tokens, which are going to be used in this flow, is stored in Vault server. So you can see here, I've already injected those tokens and just verifying here. So the first one is the Splunk token and the second one is the API token. So we have both the tokens right now available in Vault server. Now going back to the designer, the first thing we will be doing is adding an event listener node, which is the node which exposes this flow as a service endpoint. I'm selecting the event source as Amazon API Gateway, verb as get method, and the URL I'm using flight offers. We have the event listener node added. Now we are going to add our Vault node. In order to connect with the Vault node, we need to provide the connection properties, which includes host and port. So since it's running in my local machine, I'm adding localhost and port is running on 8200. I'm having my root token here. So we have the auth type. Right now, the auth type is selected as token and providing the token over here. I'm setting the action as read because we are going to read the API token and the Splunk token from the Vault server. So the path from which we need to read the Splunk token and the API token, I'm going to provide it on the data path. As you can see here, I'm giving service token as the path, which means that we have the API token and the Splunk token, which is under the service token structure. The Vault node is configured. I'm wiring the event listener node to the Vault node. Now we need to actually set the values that we retrieve from the Vault node into a variable. For this, I'm using a set property and I'm adding the display name as set tokens. I'm adding two variables here. So I'm selecting vars. The first one is named as API token The second one is named as the Splunk token. So I have two variables now defined. Now I need to actually place the value that is retrieved from the Vault node to be available to the variables. The response from the Vault node is always available as part of the payload. So I'm setting it as payload dot get tokens from Vault and result dot API token. Similarly, I'm setting the Splunk token. So with this, we have set the values into the variables. Now to add the Splunk. Now if you see here, I don't have a Splunk node here. So I'm going back to my Exchange and I'm going to add Splunk node. And under logging, now I have the Splunk node. So I'm adding the Splunk node over here. I already have a Splunk account. So I'm going to configure the Splunk just like the Vault. I'm configuring the Splunk host and port connection details. Port is 8088 default port. I'm setting the message as entry. And in order to get the token, which is already we have set it into a variable, so what we are going to do is we'll be use wars.splunk token. So we have set the token into the Splunk token in the earlier step. So we are just pasting wars.splunk token. So Splunk node is also configured. Now we need to configure the REST endpoint, which is an HTTP request endpoint. I gave it as invoke flight offer API. It's a get method, and the URL endpoint is given by Amadeus, which is an external API endpoint. The return value is a JSON, so I'm giving it as parse JSON object and giving the default timeout itself. Authentication, I'm setting it as a bearer token. Now again, just like Splunk, here also our value comes from API token, which was set into a variable. So I give wars dot API token. Now I'm going to finish the flow by adding an event listener end node. I'm setting the display as response and payload as message.payload, which will be the payload that is returned by the REST service. So as you can see, we have orchestrated a flow which is actually invoking an external service, and in order to connect with this external service as well as for logging infrastructure, the credentials are stored on a Vault server, and the Vault node is actually retrieving these details for the flow to execute. So now we are done with the flow. Now let's test this particular flow. So to do the testing, we'll go to the test tab. And as you can see here, I've already created a test case actually. So to build this test case, in the palette, you can actually go for selecting the test case and test case end node. So a test case node will carry the detail about what API that I need to invoke. So in our case, we created an API with a path flight offers to, and the test case end node is without, it doesn't have any specific configuration. It's just ending the test case. So the nodes are wired. The moment it is wired, the test case will be appearing on the test tab. So all you need to do is run the flow. As you can see, the flow has executed. And if you expand it on the response section, you can see the body, which is the payload that is returned by the external REST API. On the traces, you can see for each node which is available on the main tab, as I hover on top of each sections, the appropriate sections will be showcasing here. So in this case, I have a Vault node, and you can see here in this Vault node, the output, if I expand it, I have the API token and the Splunk token returned. So with this, we are actually connecting to the Vault server and retrieving the appropriate tokens which is required for the Splunk node and for the REST API. And if you go to the Splunk, for the last 15 minutes, I'm doing a search. And you can see here the message, flight log entry. So with this, the demo is getting completed. Thank you.